I'm Sudha Sankar. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Agricultural and Human Sciences. And I worked with Michael and Deja, who, oh my God, saved my life because boy, the tech issues that I ran into. Yeah, I think I would absolutely have given up and never come back to this again. So, which did not happen. So, um, a little bit about what I set out to do. I teach a course in this department focused on ethics, professional ethics, and policy. And so, one of the and a little context here. So it is it's a kind of topic that requires a lot of reading, but also a lot of synthesis and engagement. It requires critical thinking, and it needs to happen in a group setting. It can't, just as we would in any professional setting where we make ethical decisions. I wanted to create an experience where students are able to, again, work in those similar processes across professional boundaries and stimulate what it would be like to make those important decisions in the real world. One of the challenges, a little context about who is in my course. I get a lot of non-traditional students, a lot. In fact, 90% are non-traditional students. I rarely get students who are right out of their undergraduate studies or who've been in school in the last few years. I most frequently get students who've been out of school for at least 5 years, many for 10, 20 years, who are just returning to school. And so that has felt like um, like a different experience, both for me and for them, because what we take for granted as easy in terms of reading and consolidation isn't that easy when you're coming back to this after such a long time. Obviously, the strengths are that they bring an immense amount of world related practical knowledge that they can apply to this. But it tends to pose some challenges when I assign readings or ask them to engage in things. I've discovered I need to get more specific and even provide more opportunities for them to practice, for example, synthesis instead of summary. At the graduate level, you expect students to be synthesizing information, not just summarizing things that they read, which has been another challenge that I've encountered. So, all this to say, I set out to do this grant because I wanted to figure out if I could use Perusall to create a more interactive process of reading, of engaging with the readings for the course. So it doesn't feel, one, overwhelming. Two, they're able to all do it together, and there's conversation involved, which is, I think, what many of my students are used to in the real world. And that was my main goal. And really, I wanted to get them to read because that was becoming a problem. Students would start reading, they'd get overwhelmed. I genuinely believe they wanted to do it, but just couldn't. It was too much, it was overwhelming. And so they just wouldn't do it, or they would skim and try to make things up, which I can tell is happening, but I don't want to punish them for it. So my goals were, as I said, to integrate readings into Perusall, to encourage them to peruse the content together, reduce overwhelm, and increase enjoyment of the readings. But in the course, in the process of going through this, I kind of added one more goal. Another feature of my course is that I develop case studies that they can practice the content on, and I have them engage in those case studies. Part of the challenge that happens when I do that is when I post a case study and ask them to have a discussion on it, each and every one, like starts from the beginning. There's no flow of discussion. Instead, they just post their own entire response to it, and it's really hard to get them to interact with each other in the Moodle forum. I think it's just the way it's built. It's like asking for a narrative response as opposed to responding to each other. It's not built like social media. So I was hoping that transitioning the case studies into Perusall could help me sort of solve that. And of course, as a result of doing this, there's I've encountered the issue of how do I maintain a sense of flow and coherence across assignments? Because now I have, of course, a third kind of discussion that takes place, which has to do with reflections on their professional experiences. So it's sort of a mix of all these things. So over the course of the semester, some weeks we do reflections on their professional experiences in relation to the content they're hearing. Some weeks we do case study discussions, and some weeks we engage in discussions purely based on the readings. Now, if I move two of these into Perusall, is that going to be fragmented? Am I going to have, 1 week they're on Moodle, 1 week they're on Perusall? What is it going to do to their ability to engage in this? As it is, some of this could be technologically challenging. Now, if I use two different platforms for discussions on different weeks, I don't know what that's going to look like. Anyway, part of the thing I'm trying to figure out. One major challenge I encountered, this process this semester has been very challenging. Thankfully, Michael and Deja were very patient and present. And Michael really went all out to help me kind of solve the technical issues. Basically, every time I tried to set up and link Perusall from Moodle, it just would not. Perusall was recognizing me as logged in, but Moodle would not connect to Perusall. We tried several different things. It took us a good 2 months to figure this out, and technical support from Perusall to, delete an account, restart it, and try to do that. Ultimately, it worked. So I have been able to make some progress on trying to figure some of this out. So some of the key decisions I had to make along the way: do I want to engage folks in this as a group? Do I want to split assignments into groups or have the whole class engage in the assignment? I was able to make that decision. I'm going with the simple of have the whole class engage in the assignment. It's not a very big class, so I think it makes more sense to keep things simple to start with. The other challenge was whether to use the rubric that's built into Perusall or use my own. I have a rubric where, based on my experiences with who the students are that come into the course, I emphasize certain things like, of course, there's timeliness of posting and all of the basics, but as also I try to emphasize synthesis and integration of content across the lectures and the readings as opposed to summary. And that's something that I realized I had to do, because if I don't specify that, I get a lot of surface level engagement with the content, simply because students are coming into this after a long time and they're not always ready to or prepared to engage in a graduate level course. I decided ultimately to stick with the rubric built into Perusall, but it's not without its challenges, because, as I said, how do I then, the main issue I encounter, so I went ahead and set up what I think the rubric might look like. I just adjusted the percentages assigned to each of these. For now, I've taken out upvoting at the moment. I may change my mind and put that back in. But I've given a lot of emphasis to comment content and getting responses. And this is where I run into a challenge. Comment content in Perusall seems to be based, the way it grades it seems to be based on some kind of algorithm that's built into the system. I don't know what that algorithm does. So I think what I'm planning on doing now is doing some test posts myself and seeing what it does with that and how it grades it. I'll try to mirror the things that I see in discussions from my students, and see if that is and then I'll grade those posts myself and see if there's an alignment or a misalignment. And if there is a misalignment, I'm not really sure how to address this, whether I'd have to manually go in and adjust some grades based on what I'm looking for, or maybe this will just once students are in this platform, maybe being in this platform in this format itself will encourage them to engage the way that I want them to. I'm not sure. So I guess it'll be a trial run this spring when I try this out to see what really happens. The next thing I had to figure out is which assignments and discussions to integrate into Perusall. As I said, I have a partial solution to this. So I did decide that I would integrate readings into this, specifically the peer-reviewed readings and chapters. I would integrate those into Perusall. I will integrate the case study assignments into Perusall because both of those make sense. The part that I haven't figured out is the reflection-based discussions. So discussions where, for example, in 1 week we talk about professional boundaries and roles. So I might, in a Moodle discussion, I would have prompt questions around their practical experiences and how they apply the concepts of professional boundaries and roles into their lives, and then they would share that information with each other. I'm not sure how I would integrate something like that into Perusall. It doesn't sound like something that I could, but what that leaves me with is maybe weeks 1 through 3, I'm having them engage in discussions in Moodle. And then in week 4 and 5, I'm having them move to Perusall. And then week 6, I have them moving back to Moodle. Now that feels messy to me. So I haven't quite figured out whether to change those assignments and figure something else out, or find a way to make them more reading based and move them into Perusall. I don't know the answer. Or maybe it'll be fine. I don't know. So that part is undecided. Next thing was how to present this to students in the syllabus. It's a work in progress. It's been really helpful that Deja and Michael were able to locate some examples of how other faculty have presented this in their syllabus. And I'm kind of reviewing that. But now that I've made some of these decisions, I feel like I have a slightly better idea. Once I've figured out the undecided pieces, I'll be better able to integrate that into the syllabus, because I also have to figure out, I have to present it in a way that's coherent to them, and also integrate it into the grading rubric for the semester. How do I introduce and prepare students to engage in the platform? So this is something that I've changed. Usually week 1, we dive into content. Right off the bat, we dive into content. But I think this semester, in the coming semester, I will probably dedicate week 1 specifically to familiarizing themselves with the syllabus and to familiarizing themselves with Perusall. In fact, I'm trying to integrate those two things. I'm thinking about putting the syllabus in Perusall and having them go in, comment, and ask questions about the syllabus in Perusall, and I'll go in and reply and offer them clarifications. This is what I'm thinking right now. I'm going to do a test run, but I think 2 birds, 1 stone. I think we're going to, get that out of the way right at the beginning, and that way I could also hopefully help them troubleshoot. I had so much trouble logging in, so I'm hoping they don't. But if they do, at least I can, help troubleshoot that in week 1 as opposed to later in the semester. So here, just a couple of screenshots of how I've integrated readings into, so right here. So for example, for week 10, we have 2 readings. So what I've done is I've given them a description and a prompt for the lens and the eye with which to approach that reading, so that as they annotate, they're keeping that lens in mind. And then this is one of the places where I try to address the synthesis issue. I've done the same for reading 2. But in reading 2, I refer back to reading 1, and I specifically ask them to, now that you've read reading 1 and you've annotated that, now keep that in mind and make comments integrating the context of reading 1 into reading 2. So I don't know how this is going to work, but we're going to give it a try and see what happens. This is an example of a case study that I put into the Perusall platform as well. So again, I've given them instructions. I introduced them to why we're doing the case study, what the purpose is of that. So I try to connect it to the learning goals for the course. And I give them some guidelines on or prompts to keep in mind when they're doing their annotations. So observe this, observe that, and keep these things in mind. And then they can access the case study and actually read through it, and they'll do annotations on the case study itself and comment on each other's observations of the things that I asked them to observe. And based on that, they'll collectively try come up with answers to the questions that the case study asks. And lastly, thank you, Deja, Michael, and Carrie. I don't think I would have gotten through this without you. And Carrie, I'm sorry I spelled your name wrong.